All wars are fought twice, the first time on the battlefield, the second time in memory. That powerful quote from Viet Thanh Nguyen opens Patrick Radden Keefe's incredible book, Say Nothing, and it really sets the stage perfectly for our deep dive today.
It really does.
Welcome everyone to Artificially Literate. This is the space where we explore books, films, ideas, looking for those deeper meanings, philosophical connections,
Yeah.
Every time we get together, we try to break down a piece of literature, maybe a film, sometimes a cultural moment, and really look at its literal and philosophical sides.
Exactly.
So whether you just love stories or you're looking for meaning or maybe you just want a thoughtful takeaway, this is, we hope, your space to reflect, learn, and maybe see things a little differently.
And today we're definitely heading into some, well, deeply unsettling territory, but it's absolutely essential, I think. We're journeying into the true story captured in Say Nothing. Keefe's work, it's just not a dry historical account, is it? It's meticulously researched, yes, but it reads like a thriller sometimes, plunging you right into the heart of Northern Ireland's troubles.
It really does.
And it shows how memory and truth and identity all get tangled up after conflict like this. It lays bare the moral complexities, those impossible choices people faced, and the lasting human cost, all seen through the eyes of the people who lived it.
So our mission today for this deep dive is really to try and unpack that intricate web, the personal stories, the political maneuvering, the tragic disappearances that define that whole era. We want to help you understand what this amazing book tells us about individuals caught in the middle, about societies trying to heal, and about, well, how incredibly elusive peace can actually be.
Yeah.
So thinking about that opening quote again, all wars are fought twice, the second time in memory. What does that immediately bring up for you, thinking about the Troubles specifically, where the past is, well, so fiercely fought over?
It immediately tells you that history isn't, fixed. It's not just facts in a book. It's alive, it's fluid, it gets reshaped all the time by personal stories, by political aims, by the trauma that just hangs in the air.
Right.
And Keefe is brilliant at showing this. The truth of the Troubles isn't one single story. It's like a mosaic, isn't it? All these deeply personal, often contradictory memories.
Absolutely.
And he forces you to grapple with this idea that how a society remembers its war can be just as brutal, maybe sometimes even more damaging than the actual fighting, especially when memories get twisted or buried.
Yeah, that selective memory, the things left unsaid, the way different groups rewrite history. It's all part of that second war, the war in memory.
The human cost and the seeds of rebellion.
Okay, so to really get this, we have to start where Keefe starts, with a story that just hits you with the human cost. It's December 1972, the abduction of Jean McConville. A widow, 10 kids living in Divis Flats, West Belfast. You have to picture it. Cold evening, near Christmas, dark already. Their new flat, the cooker wasn't even hooked up yet. So Jean, trying to keep things normal, sends her daughter Helen, she's 15, out for fish and chips.
Right.
And while they're waiting, Jean takes maybe one of the only moments of privacy she ever got, draws a hot bath, locks the door. She's just stepped out, still feeling the warmth, when there's a knock.
Yeah.
About 7 p.m. The kids, naturally, they think it's Helen with the food, but it wasn't.
No, it wasn't. And what happened next is just, well, horrific, utterly devastating for those children. Masked men burst in. And the chilling thing, they spoke with this awful familiarity. They even knew the kids' names.
Oh, wow.
Michael McConville, one of the sons, he remembers that sickening feeling, realizing these weren't strangers. These were neighbors. Think about that. The people you live beside, your community, suddenly they're the intruders. They're the ones doing this.
Unbelievable.
Archie, he was 16, the oldest one home. He asks if he can go with his mom. The gang says yes, pushes the younger kids into a bedroom. But as they're leaving, Archie looks through these vertical slats in a wall they call pigeonholes.
Nice.
And he watches his mother being bundled roughly into a van. It speeds off, disappears into the Belfast night. And Archie realizes later the awful irony, they never meant for him to go with her. They just used him to get her out.
Oh, my God.
He's left standing there, total silence. And her last words just hanging there. Watch the children until I come back. She never did.
And the aftermath for those kids. Just trauma. Helen finds her mother later near an army barracks looking terrible, no shoes. Jean makes up this story about being tricked after bingo, trying to protect them.
Desperate lie.
Yeah, but the damage was done. They end up in care, split up, sent to this place, Nazareth Lodge Orphanage, run by these really harsh nuns. Awful place.
Grim.
The younger twins, Billy and Jim, they get moved later to Kirkhaven, a De La Salle boys' home, and there they suffer physical sexual abuse.
Hmm.
Horrific.
Unspeakable.
And Michael, already grieving his mother's disappearance. His father had died earlier from cancer. He remembers being furious when some welfare official just heartlessly suggested his mom had abandoned them. He knew she hadn't. These kids lost everything.
And it's crucial, like you said, to connect this personal tragedy to the bigger picture. Jean McConville's abduction, it wasn't random. It was like a symbol of the displacement, the fear, the total collapse of trust happening across Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
In just the summer of '69, nearly 2,000 families, mostly Catholic, fled their homes in Belfast. Over the years, maybe 10% of the whole city's population moved.
That's staggering.
The city itself became this nightmare landscape. Barricades from hijacked buses, burning cars, streets covered in rubble and glass, Belfast confetti, as one poet called it.
Right.
And Jean was just trying to hold her family together in Divis Flats, this really dense, neglected area after her husband Arthur died. The pressure must have been immense.
Unimaginable.
And Keefe highlights this chilling point. How quickly suspicion could flare up. There's this specific story, Jean comforting a wounded British soldier, just giving him a pillow from her house. A basic human act.
Yeah, compassion.
But later, that act becomes this source of deadly suspicion against her within her own community. Makes you wonder, how does conflict just erode basic trust so fast, even between neighbors? What does it mean when neighbors become intruders?
It's a terrifying question. And Keefe really makes you feel that breakdown. It wasn't abstract. It was people looking over their shoulders, suspecting everyone. How do you even start to rebuild from that?
Exactly. And it wasn't just trust that went. It was, like you said, basic compassion. That simple act with the soldier, potentially a death sentence.
Yeah.
It shows the brutal logic, the absolute loyalty demanded.
So while the McConvilles represent the civilian tragedy, Keefe also takes us inside the mindset of those who believed they were fighting for a cause, for justice. And for that, we need to understand someone like Dolores Price.
Yes, her story is key.
She came from a family that was just steeped in Irish republicanism, this belief system, hundreds of years old, that saw the British as occupiers in Ireland.
Deeply ingrained.
Her father, Albert, he'd been in the IRA himself. He'd tell his daughters these stories, daring escapes, bombings, and still this really fervent forgotten Ireland idea. Their mantelpiece wasn't family photos. It was pictures taken in prisons. A lineage of defiance.
And that historical context is so important. Republicanism wasn't just politics, it was identity. Rooted in figures like Patrick Pearse from the 1916 Easter Rising, who talked about blood sacrifice.
Right, that idea of cleansing bloodshed.
Yeah, this idea that violence was necessary almost wholly to achieve Irish freedom. It permeated the Price family. And the partition of Ireland in 1921, creating Northern Ireland ruled by Britain, that just solidified it for Republicans like them. They wouldn't even say Northern Ireland, always the north of Ireland. Even names were political battlegrounds.
And Dolores herself, she sounds like she was fiercely independent from day one, refusing to go to Mass as a teenager, telling her mom she'd just pretend.
Ah, yes.
Inspired by Che Guevara, revolutionaries. His sacrifice just made him more heroic in her eyes. And then things escalated with events like the Civil Rights March in January '69, from Belfast to Derry, students protesting discrimination against Catholics.
A key moment.
Peaceful march, but met with violent counter-protests.
Right.
People like Ronald Bunting, Ian Paisley, the anti-Catholic minister. And it culminated in this ambush at Burntallet Bridge. Marchers attacked with stones, spades, by Protestant Unionists. Just brutal.
Awful. And that kind of event, that visible state failure to protect peaceful protesters, it pushed a lot of young Catholics like Dolores towards thinking, well, maybe peaceful means aren't enough.
Exactly. So in that supercharged atmosphere, Dolores formally joins the Provisional IRA, the PIRA. There's a swearing-in ceremony, and she rises fast.
Remarkably fast.
Stories start flying about the Price sisters Dolores and her younger sister Marion, who the press called the Widowmaker. Dolores gets this media rep as one of the most dangerous young women in Ulster, a deadly femme fatale.
Quite the image.
And the anecdotes are wild. Their mum, Chrissy, apparently faced down RUC officers so Dolores could finish her breakfast before being arrested. The sisters robbing banks dressed as nuns, hijacking a post office lorry.
Audacious stuff.
And Dolores later admitted, kind of surprisingly, it was an exciting time. I should be ashamed to admit there was fun in it, which is startling.
It really is. And it makes you think about the psychology of radicalization. How do family beliefs, systemic discrimination, how does that shape someone's path to violence? And is there, for young people especially, is this sort of intoxicating thrill, this fun side to being part of a revolution before the real weight hits.
It's a disturbing thought, isn't it? The fun. But Keefe suggests it was also about identity, belonging to something powerful, fighting back. It helps you understand, maybe, how those choices get made, how idealism can blur into brutality.
Yeah, it wasn't just the cause, maybe. It was the camaraderie, the purpose, feeling like you finally had some agency, some power.
And then there's Brendan Hughes, another absolutely central figure. He was the commander of the IRA's D Company, known as the Dirty Dozen.
A legendary unit.
Hughes's whole philosophy, apparently from his dad, who was a bricklayer, was lead from the front. He didn't just send people out, he went with them.
Right.
Dolores Price, when she first met him, she was just dazzled. Said he seemed to be 100 places at the one time. I don't think he slept.
High praise in that world.
His company operated at this frantic pace, made 4 or 5 operations a day, robbing banks, doing floats, basically hunting British soldiers, planting bombs, gun battles. It was relentless.
Constant action.
And to Hughes, even with the violence, it often felt like a grand adventure. This tempo just fueled the struggle, drew more people in.
And his personal daring was, well, legendary. Taking on army units with just an old .45 pistol from World War II, apparently even the British soldiers had a kind of grudging respect for him. He fell in love with the Armalite rifle, lightweight, powerful, and he figured out this crazy way to smuggle them in using Irish crew members on the Queen Elizabeth II cruise liner.
Seriously, the QE2.
Yeah. West Belfast was his territory, his sea, like Mao said, where the guerrilla swings among the people. There was this whole informal network, people letting them use their houses as shortcuts, hiding places, sometimes out of support, sometimes maybe out of fear. He knew every alley.
But the personal cost?
Yeah.
Huge. British soldiers harassing his father, making him walk home barefoot after interrogation, saying they'd kill Brendan.
Brutal intimidation.
He saw Joe McCann, a leader from the official IRA, shot dead, unarmed. Hughes himself got ambushed by this plainclothes British unit. The MRF will talk more about them. He was only saved because Gerry Adams basically forced him to get out of Belfast for a bit.
A close call.
But Hughes couldn't sit still. A week in exile in Dundalk, then he was right back in it. Looking at guys like Hughes, you have to ask, is it a grand adventure, really? Or is it this necessary, brutal path they feel forced onto? And how does living in that constant violence just normalize it, blur the lines? What does it mean to be a lad you could depend upon in that kind of war zone?
That phrase, lad you could depend upon, yeah, it captures that intense loyalty, the brutal pragmatism needed. But as Keefe shows, that intensity wasn't just on one side. The British state was also adapting, evolving its own strategies. Which brings us to people like Frank Kitson.
The evolving conflict and shifting sands.
Exactly. Let's shift to the British counterinsurgency side now. And Frank Kitson is a really important figure here. He was a brigadier in the British Army, and he developed this very systematic approach to counterinsurgency, studied it at Oxford, drew a lot from his experience in Kenya during the Mao uprising. His book, Low Intensity Operations, became hugely influential. It stressed not just fighting insurgents, but winning hearts and minds, and critically gathering intelligence. He even sort of mused that maybe his success in Kenya was because he could think just a little bit more like a terrorist.
Quite a statement.
It is. So Kitson arrives in Northern Ireland as brigadier, just as British troop numbers are soaring. From under 3,000 in 69 to over 30,000 by 72.
Wow, huge increase.
And this is a different British army, right? Not the WWII army, but one shaped by these smaller colonial conflicts, which raised questions for some soldiers. Is Northern Ireland just another colony, or is it really part of the UK?
A fundamental identity crisis for the army, almost.
Kind of. And Kitson becomes forever linked with the policy of internment, locking people up without trial. Now, he later said he warned against using it in Northern Ireland at that specific time, thinking it would backfire, but he'd supported it elsewhere. Had this chilling line, it's better than killing them.
Grim logic.
And internment, when they rolled it out on a huge scale, it did backfire spectacularly, just as Kitson had apparently predicted for that context. Brendan Hughes and the IRA, they knew it was coming. They'd seen the army doing a dry run, updating address lists.
They were preparing.
Yeah, and this massive new prison camp, Long Kesh, was being built just outside Belfast. It was obvious what it was for. So Hughes just took his men underground. When the sweep happened, the army barely caught any key provisional IRA figures. The IRA held these smug press conferences afterwards.
So it just hardened opposition.
Exactly. It radicalized people, didn't really quell the insurgency at all. And in this climate of escalating covert tactics, you get the Military Reaction Force, the MRF.
Ray, you mentioned them ambushing Hughes.
Yes, these were plainclothes British soldiers, often recruited specifically because they were of Irish origin, so they could blend in better. They'd pose as like road sweepers, bin men, even cosmetic salesmen, gathering intelligence.
Going deep undercover.
But their role became much more controversial. Effectively, they became hit squads, driving unmarked cars, using paramilitary-style weapons, AK-47s, Armalites, the same guns the paramilitaries used.
Why use those weapons specifically?
So that if someone was killed, the ballistics would point to the IRA or loyalist groups. Plausible deniability for the state. The attempt on Hughes was exactly that kind of operation. It makes you ask, doesn't it? When does a state fighting insurgency cross the line? When does maintaining order become barbarism? And what are the long-term effects when you start dehumanizing the enemy with these covert tactics?
That blurring of lines is terrifying. The state starts acting like the groups it's fighting. It feels like a downward spiral.
It really does, a kind of moral corrosion on all sides. And it certainly didn't win many hearts and minds.
No kidding. And this perceived strategic failure maybe led to shifts on the IRA side too, particularly with Dolores Price. She became convinced that hitting Britain itself was the way forward.
Yes, she believed quite strongly that a short, sharp shock and incursion into the heart of the empire would be more effective than 20 car bombs in any part of the north of Ireland.
And this came after Bloody Friday, right?
Exactly. Bloody Friday in Belfast was horrific. 19 bombs, 11 people killed, including a child, 130 injured. It was so indiscriminate, it actually damaged IRA support even among Catholics.
The civilian cost was too high.
Yes. And crucially, Price felt the British public just wasn't feeling the war. It was happening over there. She said, only half of it is our war, the other half is their war, and some of it should be fought on their territory. Brendan Hughes, who'd helped plan Bloody Friday, felt immense guilt about it, which maybe strengthened the case for changing tactics.
So the London bombing mission in March '73, that was the result.
Direct result. The team, including Dolores and Marion Price, hijacked cars in Dublin, repainted them, packed them with explosives, over 100 pounds each. Big bombs. Targets were symbolic and military. Army Recruiting Center, British Forces Broadcasting, New Scotland Yard, the Old Bailey Courthouse.
Okay.
And critically, because of Bloody Friday, they had strict orders. Give a warning. 1 hour exactly before detonation to avoid civilian casualties.
Yeah.
But the warning system failed. Police miscommunication, confusion, and there's this terrible moment that the clock is ticking, and there's a school bus evacuating kids right near one of the bombs, a policeman screaming, "Get those stupid bastards away from the windows." An elderly man nearby actually died of a heart attack just after one explosion.
Oh, God. So the warning failed.
Tragically, yes. The intent might have been there, but the execution, disastrous.
And the Price sisters were caught.
Caught at Heathrow Airport. Almost easily. They didn't really have a cover story, thought they'd be long gone. Their trial at Winchester Castle was a massive media event. The press called them the Sisters of Terror, portrayed them as these incredibly dangerous figures, sometimes mixing it with this weird lethal liberation feminist angle. But in court, they were defiant. Almost sassy, apparently, laughing when a photo of a wrecked car was shown. Just completely unrepentant.
Wow. And then came the hunger strike.
Yes, their defiance continued inside. They went on hunger strike demanding political prisoner status. It lasted 167 days, and they endured forced feeding in Brixton Prison.
That sounds horrific.
It was dehumanizing. Tied to a chair, rubber tube shoved down your throat, gagging, suffocating. It echoed Terence McSwiney, the Irish Republican who died on hunger strike back in 1920.
Right, his famous quote.
It is not those who inflict the most, but those who suffer the most who will conquer. That resonated hugely. Public pressure built up. There were even bizarre things like art thefts, a Vermeer stolen, and kidnappings, all demanding the Price's transfer.
So the government was under pressure.
Huge pressure. Roy Jenkins, the Home Secretary, he felt trapped. He had forebodings of menace, feared massive violence if they died, worried he'd never be able to walk safely in American cities with large Irish populations.
The international dimension.
Exactly. So reluctantly, Jenkins gave in. June 1974, the hunger strikers announced they'd secured a promise of transfer to Northern Ireland, and their time in Armagh jail afterwards was apparently much better, almost like a suite in a hotel compared to Brixton.
Quite a contrast.
Yeah. And interestingly, during this period, Dolores starts talking about a repudiation of violence, maybe tactical, maybe genuine, maybe a bit of both, aimed at getting released. It makes you think about the ethics of acceptable casualties in these conflicts and how the media, maybe without meaning to, shapes how we see terrorists, sometimes even amplifying their message.
That's a really complex point about media perception. Even negative attention can create a platform.
Yeah.
And that McSwining quote you mentioned, it is not those who inflict the most, but those who suffer the most who will conquer. Wow. So powerful in the context of those hunger strikes.
It really captures a core belief driving much of this resistance, however brutal its manifestations.
We're deep diving into Patrick Radden Keefe's Say Nothing here on Artificially Literate. If you're finding this exploration compelling, just a reminder to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen so you don't miss future deep dives.
Okay, so after the hunger strikes, and especially with figures like Jerry Adams gaining influence, there's another big shift in IRA strategy.
Yeah.
They move away from aiming for, immediate victory, driving the British out now.
Right.
And they pivot towards planning for a long war. It was pragmatic, really. Public support for the provisionals, the PIRA, was shaky after years of violence, and the British seemed prepared to stay indefinitely.
Settling in for the long haul.
Exactly. Adams argued, basically, that their generation had to force change, not just pass the fight on to the next one.
And Adams himself was developing his ideas inside prison, wasn't he, in Long Kesh?
Very much so. He kind of turned it into this barbed wire ivory tower, encouraged prisoners to study, debate, organized lectures, discussions at the wire between the prison cages.
Wow.
And he started writing these articles as brownie for the Republican newspaper, smuggling them out on cigarette papers. These comms kept the leadership inside connected to the outside.
Incredible.
And Long Kesh became this incubator for future leaders, too. People like Bobby Sands, young, headstrong, who would later lead the incredibly consequential hunger strike.
But before that came the protests over prison conditions, right? The demand for political status.
Yes. The British government removed special category statuses, which had basically acknowledged them as political prisoners. The prisoners refused to accept being treated as ordinary criminals. This led first to the blanket protest.
Refusing uniforms, just wearing blankets.
Exactly. Then it escalated to the no-wash protest. And finally, the really horrific, dirty protest.
Smearing excrement on the walls.
Yes. Brendan Hughes, who was the IRA commander inside at the time, apparently suggested it when they didn't know what else to do with their waste and solitary. It was this ultimate act of defiance, going against every basic human instinct of cleanliness, just showing their absolute determination.
Unbelievable desperation. And Thatcher's government didn't budge.
Not an inch. Margaret Thatcher became prime minister, and her line was resolute. Crime is crime is crime. No political status, they were criminals. End of story.
This led to more tragedy.
It did. Michael Gahn, another IRA hunger striker, died in an English prison. Many believed complications from forced feeding contributed. His death just raised the stakes even higher.
Yeah.
And Dolores Price, looking back, she expressed these really complicated feelings, wondering if her own victory in getting transferred after her hunger strike somehow paved the way for the later deaths of Bobby Sands and the 9 others, because the government knew it could potentially withstand that pressure again.
Oh, wow. That's a heavy burden.
Immense. It just throws into sharp relief that question. What happens when political goals justify these extreme methods, like self-starvation? How do these big ideas, state, revolution crash against the raw, physical reality of human suffering, leaving these deep, deep scars?
It's a clash where ideals meet unbearable reality. And Keefe shows those scars, decades later, still weren't healed for so many.
Legacies, truth, and reconciliation.
So let's move into that post-conflict era, or maybe post-Good Friday Agreement era. And Brendan Hughes is a really key figure here, showing the disillusionment felt by some. After he got out of Long Kesh in '86, nearly 13 years inside, his life was tough. Marriage failed, living on benefits. And to even move around Belfast without being recognized, he created this whole alter ego, Arthur McAllister. Shaved his mustache, dyed his hair, wore a 3-piece suit, pretended to be a toy salesman. The complete opposite of who he was.
Just trying to disappear from his own past.
Exactly. Even while it haunted him. He was incredibly bitter about the Good Friday Agreement, the GFA. He joked it stood for God fuck all.
Wow. Harsh.
He felt totally betrayed by Jerry Adams, his old friend. Believed Adams had been molded by the British, was now cleaning up the history of the armed struggle, denying his own role.
Sanitizing the past.
That's how Hughes saw it. And the trauma was still so real for Hughes. He talked about the death smell from the hunger strike hospital wing, this horrific smell he could still sometimes sense. Recurring nightmares. He was also devastated when Dr. Ross, the kind doctor who looked after him during the hunger strike, later died by suicide, apparently tormented by having watched those 10 men die.
Oh, that's tragic.
It shows the hidden cost, doesn't it? The cost of peace, even. So Hughes's reason for talking to the Boston College Project, giving those interviews that were meant to be sealed until he died. It was raw. He said basically, I'm not going to deny what I did, and to hear people I would have died for stand up and deny their part in history. It's disgusting.
He felt history was being rewritten.
Absolutely. And it drove him crazy that Adams seemed so unaffected. Never looked as though he had lost a night's sleep, Hughes said. While Hughes himself and others were tormented. It really highlights that clash, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The peacemaker narrative versus the raw experience of the fighters. What happens when your sacrifice feels betrayed by the political outcome and is forgetting necessary for peace? Or is it just a dangerous distortion?
That's the core tension, isn't it? Selective memory as a political strategy versus the agony for those who can't forget. Which brings us to maybe the most explosive part of the book, the truth, or the alleged truth, about Jean McConville's disappearance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Brendan Hughes, in his Boston College tapes, he claimed Jean McConville was a tout, an informer for the British.
Right.
He said she was found with a transmitter, a radio, given to her by the British, and that her own kids were, maybe unknowingly, gathering information for her.
Wow. That's a huge accusation.
Huge. And Hughes claimed Jerry Adams personally ordered her to be disappeared, abducted and killed secretly rather than just shot and left on the street as a warning, because killing a woman, a widowed mother, publicly would have been terrible PR for the IRA.
Okay. And Dolores Price backed this up.
She did. First apparently off tape, then later she confirmed it to Ed Maloney, one of the historians involved in the Boston College Project. She said she drove McConville to her execution with Pat McClure and a third person, unnamed, who fired the shot.
She admitted driving her.
Yes, but later, Price expressed deep regret, torment over it. Especially, it seems, after hearing Adams talk quite casually, blithely, she felt, about the disappearance of another person, Joe Linsky, who was an old friend of hers. That apparent hypocrisy seemed to really push her buttons. She felt she should have done more for Linsky, and maybe that feeling extended to McConville, too.
But the McConville family, they completely denied she was an informer.
Absolutely. Vehemently. Michael McConville just scoffed at the idea, said his mother was overworked, depressed, fragile, trying to raise 10 kids alone after losing her husband, not some master spy.
Right.
Helen, the daughter, believed Jean would have admitted anything under torture, given her state. And complicating things further, the police ombudsman investigated in 2006 and found no evidence she was an agent. But they also noted the official UK policy of neither confirm nor deny about agents. So ambiguity remained.
And the radio, the transmitter Hughes mentioned.
That became another whole debate. Ex-police initially denied they used small handheld radios then. But later, evidence, including a photo, surfaced showing the British Army did use small radios in Divis Flats around 1972. So it just muddied the waters even more. Even the exact dates of her supposed interrogation and abduction are disputed in different accounts.
So conflicting stories everywhere.
Everywhere. And this is where the Boston College Oral History Project becomes central and so controversial. It was set up with good intentions. Record the stories of former paramilitaries for future historians, promising absolute confidentiality until their deaths. That promise was key to getting people to talk openly.
Right, essential for candor.
But then came the subpoena. The U.S. government, requested by UK police investigating McConville's murder, demanded the tapes. Long legal battle ensued. Interviewers like Maloney and Anthony McIntyre initially denied Price had even discussed McConville on tape.
But she had.
A judge eventually listened to the tapes himself and ruled that parts, including Dolores Price's recordings discussing McConville, had to be released. It was unprecedented, breaking that seal of confidentiality, and it directly led to charges against Ivor Bell for McConville's murder and Jerry Adams being arrested and questioned. It just blew everything wide open again.
Wow. So it forces you to ask, how do you reconcile these completely conflicting truths when there's no definitive record? What's the role of history, of journalism, in digging up painful truths, even if it reopens wounds?
It's a massive ethical minefield, isn't it? History, memory, justice, pain, all tangled together. Keefe navigates it brilliantly, but leaves you with the complexity, not easy answers.
So where does this leave things? The unfinished business of peace in Northern Ireland. You have Jerry Adams, this figure who transformed himself from alleged IRA commander whom most experts and intelligence agencies believe authorized countless acts,
Right, despite his consistent denials of ever being in the IRA.
to this mainstream politician.
Yeah.
Leading Sinn Féin into government is quite the journey. His shift from, the era of kneecapping as punishment to Sinn Féin opening advice centers, helping people with welfare claims.
Yeah.
It's almost, surreal.
It is, and the ambiguity around him, around the IRA, it persists. Remember his famous line, "They haven't gone away,"
No.
Still sends chills down some spines. Adams himself saw the Good Friday Agreement not as the end, but as closing one phase and starting a new phase of struggle. Political struggle now, presumably, for a united Ireland. But the struggle continues. Legal battles still pop up against ex-paramilitaries like Ivor Bell, though he was deemed unfit for trial due to dementia, and even against British figures like Frank Kitson.
Accountability is still being sought.
On all sides. And it brings up that difficult idea of a hierarchy of victims, where outrage often depends on who did what to whom, rather than just the horror of the act itself. It's an uncomfortable reality of post-conflict societies.
And meanwhile, people like Dolores Price, who fought in the thick of it, they really struggled afterwards.
Profoundly. Battled mental illness, addiction to alcohol, Valium. She felt the peace deal fundamentally betrayed what she had been born into. She wrote these scathing pieces for an online magazine, The Blanket, attacking Adams, attacking the way the past was being smoothed over.
Still fighting, in a different way.
In a way, yes. She had this brutal line, "Painting murals on walls to commemorate blanket men after they have died a slow and lonely death from alcohol abuse is no use to anyone." She died age 62. A really poignant symbol of the enduring human cost, and how peace can feel like a bitter compromise to those who sacrificed everything for a different outcome.
Such a tragic trajectory. And the McConville family.
Still seeking truth. Still seeking accountability for Jean. Despite all the setbacks, Bell's dementia, Adams not being charged, Michael McConville, Keefe describes him quietly tending his hundreds of pigeons. A symbol of peace, maybe, endurance, in stark contrast to the violence he witnessed.
Wow, pigeons.
Yeah. And the final irony, Keefe points out, Brexit. This completely separate political upheaval might actually accidentally bring about a united Ireland, the very thing decades of terrible violence failed to achieve.
That would be.
Something else?
It really would. And it leaves us with this big final thought relevant far beyond Northern Ireland. Can you ever have true peace without fully reckoning with the past? Or is peace sometimes just built on forgetting, on selective memory, leaving those old wounds to just fester, waiting for the next generation to uncover the truth all over again?
As Brendan Hughes himself put it, haunted by everything. The truth is so very far removed from that, and I suppose I'm living proof.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Patrick Radden Keefe's remarkable book, Say Nothing, here on Artificially Literate. We really hope this exploration gave you some new perspectives on history's long shadow, the tangle of memory, and just how complicated peace really is.
It's certainly a book that stays with you.
It absolutely does. Please do check out our other episodes for more discussions like this, and be sure to follow Artificially Literate on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, all the places for future deep dives into compelling books, films, and big ideas. Stay tuned for our next book. Until then, remember, feed your brain, starve your inner fool.